Yes, mate! Give me some skin! Oh. Awkward, unrequited high five scenarios notwithstanding, I do want to talk to you today about skin tones, friends. I've been asked quite a lot recently to produce some videos dealing with skin tones, and I decided I wanted to do something that kind of wraps everything up into one. I use a kind of catch-all technique for painting skin tones, where it's more of a methodology and a theory, and not really about what paints you use. So you can kind of do the technique that I'm going to show you today with any paints that you wish. Let's start off first of all talking about the 4 paints that I decided to select. Now, in order to pull this technique off, you are going to want to pick 4 paints, and the only real rule here is that you're going to want a shadow, 2 midtones and a highlight. And as a general rule, you're going to want obviously your shadow to be the darkest, your 2 midtones to be the next 2 steps of lightness, and then your highlight to be the lightest. With that considered, you can literally pick anything you want. You could do a blue shadow with a purple and a pink mid-tone and a lime green highlight if you wanted to. Literally any 4 colours will work, so don't obsess over the colours, but in this case these are the ones that I chose. Some Nocturna skin tones, and then Sunny skin tone and Ice yellow. So it's all a bunch of Vallejo paints here. I decided I wanted to use these because for skin tones actually their sort of added pigment density makes them really quite nice to work with. And in order to begin this process, the first thing I want you to do is just thoroughly and fully opaquely base coat all of your skin in the shadow colour. So that's a really, really simple start. Just pick your shadow colour up, get it all over that skin, no problem, and we're ready to crack on then. But before we actually start to get into the meat of the painting, I want to discuss the theory behind this technique, because the idea being is you can apply this to every single skin tone you paint, and it's not a 100% realistic approach to painting skin, but it is going to work for you on every single skin tone set that you want to work up. So you can see here that I've got a snapshot of my miniature, and I've just finished that blue or dark blue base coat. It's exactly where we left it at the end of the last clip. So what I want you to do now is to look at this miniature from the top, bottom, front and back. Essentially think of it as like the 4 cardinal directions on a compass. And anything that's facing north or south, so anything that's facing directly up or directly down, will either receive a full highlight to the top of it or 0 highlight to the underside of it. So that's our first and second rules. Our third rule is a little bit more complicated. Basically, we need to isolate each individual volume. That's each individual muscle shape. So for example, you know, an entire chest muscle or an entire arm muscle, each individual complete shape within a muscle. And then we're going to apply a gradient to it, so starting from the darkest at the bottom, going to the lightest at the top. And we're going to do this for every single muscle that faces the front or the back. Now, by universally doing these gradients and making sure that it's always locked into the exact shape of the muscle, what you actually end up with is something that looks really nicely volumetrically highlighted, even though it's not necessarily realistic. It's a really clever way to be able to use a really simple method in your head to produce something that looks far more complex on the miniature. So let's go ahead with my example and I'll show you how I did this particular miniature. Okay, so over that shadow tone, the first thing I'm going to do is begin working in my first mid-tone. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sort of leave some shadow at the bottom of each of those muscular shapes that needs a gradient, but I'm going to go all the way to the top of it to complete coverage at the top. So essentially just gradiating this one color onto every single muscle. Now, the blending method you use really is up to you. Glazing will work, wet blending will work, stippling will work. You can literally use any blending method you want. You can even do this with layering. It's just obviously going to look a little bit less refined if you do it with layering. So the thing to bear in mind here is, again, we're not focusing on paints, on specific techniques. We're focusing on the theory. Pick a blending method of your choice and just start to blend in that first mid-tone color, going all the way to the top of every muscle shape, making sure that it's fully saturated, fully covered on the top of each shape. And once you've got that done, this is what you're going to have. So you can already see that a bunch of contrast has started to pop out now. And this is the great beauty of this method, is it produces really, really high contrast, which often when we're looking at miniature painting is actually a bit more important for telling our eyes to say wow than is kind of having perfect realism. If we painted most of our miniatures to have perfect realism, and you can kind of see this in the scale model world, a lot of things would look sort of drab, they'd be very mid-tone heavy, they wouldn't stand out a lot. So because we're going for maximum contrast here, as you can see just from this first stage being completed, the results are really going to work for achieving that goal. Okay, next up we're going to continue to blend, and we're going to start to mix some of our second mid-tone into our first mid-tone here. So again, the exact ratios that you mix to are kind of up to your taste. You might mix based on what you find easiest to blend, you might mix based on just how bright you want it to be. I tend to favour miniatures that are high contrast but overall of a slightly darker kind of finished look. So for me, I go about sort of 50-50 of my first mid-tone and my second mid-tone for this stage. And once you've got that worked up, you can again see that we're starting to create some really nice highlight now. The definition increases more and more every time as we get further and further apart in separation from the highest highlight parts to the deepest shadow parts. Okay, now we're going to start to establish some of our more poppy highlights, and this is going to happen largely by just isolating pretty much the top tiny little bits, you know, the top sort of 10% of each muscle shape here. So we're getting down to quite fine highlights here, but this does mean that this stage is really, really quick. We've just got to sort of dot in a few of these lighter colours towards the tops. My mixture here is now about 75% of my third colour in the sort of progression of 4, with about 25% of the second colour just to pull it down a little bit. And again, once that's done, here's the results. And we continue to build this lovely contrast. It's very, very simple and straightforward, but as you can see, each time we add a layer, we really hammer home that contrast. Okay, now I'm going to finally grab that fourth colour. So in my case today, it's the Ice Yellow from Viejo, but you could be using whatever you wanted. And I'm going to start to mix that into my previous mixture. So I'm never creating a new colour, I'm always working off of my previous mixture. And for skin tones, I do think that this is the best way to go because skin tones contain so many subtle variations in them. As we start to dot in this fourth and final highlight colour now, and we get to the reveal section where it's completed, you're going to see that we've really got massive contrast separation between the top end and the bottom end, but everything is confined really neatly within the shape of each individual muscle group. When it comes to things like the backs of hands and fingers and stuff like that, you sometimes have to get a little bit creative, but you're going to figure out very quickly for yourself how you want that to look. It's not difficult when we're just applying these basic rules of if it's facing up, it's really bright, if it's facing down, it's not highlighted at all, and if it's facing forward or backwards, then it has a gradient on it. And it's only really those gradients that require any of our concentration, and that's more just in executing them nicely. And so at the end of all that, our Slaves to Darkness Shrine Master has got his skin fully worked up and was looking pretty fine. Now I was really, really happy with how this skin tone came out. But I knew that you folks, you beautiful people, would not be happy to just see some skin tone on an otherwise undercoated miniature. So of course I finished him off, and of course I've got some Lazy Susan footage of him. Let's take a look at him completed. And there you have it, that's my really simple skin tone theory approach. There's no kind of bro science behind it or anything like that. I hear a lot of explanations for painting skin tones that are deeply, deeply confusing and full of information overload. I don't think that that is a helpful way to try and transfer these methods of learning. So I wanted to try and produce something for you that just really simplifies the idea. And when we're just saying top, bottom, front and back, I think that's something that most of our heads can kind of get around and not really struggle too much with. So I hope that you find this technique useful and that you'll give it a try. I'd love to see some examples of what you've done using this technique. Feel free to get at me on social media if you do try it and if you do like it. And of course, if there's anything you want to discuss about it in the comments, you can always leave a comment and I'll do my best to get back to you. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Let me know that you liked it. You can, of course, also subscribe and enable notifications, which will keep you up to date on what I'm doing here on YouTube. Finally, I do have a Patreon, which you can support the creation of this content through, starting from as little as $1 a month. And with all of that said, I will now stop rabbiting, get out of your ears, roll those credits, and let you enjoy painting skin tones. Thank you for watching, everyone, and bye for now.